have to work, and it's a grind, and it's a constant struggle getting people to understand what your art is. Because especially when it's new, a completely new thing to people who aren't used to hearing it, you have to convince them of its value. And for me, it's getting people to understand that our connections as people are easier seen when heard. Because most people are introduced, at least in the United States, I'm assuming here too, are introduced to poetry through reading, through books. The thing about reading is, if you're not interested in what you're reading, you read it in that disinterested voice. So it doesn't make you want to invest any of yourself into it. So I believe poetry is very a live phenomenon in the sense that it needs to be seen to be experienced. Because you get to see the emotion attached to the voice instead of trying to decipher and figure out what the word, what the emotion behind the word is. You know, and so, you know, here, I got my name out, just to give examples of what I did. I used to get stickers. I used to print out stickers on my home printer, cut them up, and I'd put lines of my poems, like one line and my name. And I would go around everywhere and I would stick them up in bathrooms, on the side of buildings, on a menu, anywhere. And what wound up happening is I'd perform at a place and I'd say one of the lines and someone would go, "Hey, I saw that somewhere," and they wouldn't even know where. But it started to get my name out there and it created like a buzz about what I did. Now, I've worked for companies like Nike and Pepsi and Adidas, and a lot of those jobs came from being in the right place at the right time and also having the material necessary for the job when it presented itself. I think it's important as a writer to not just get stuck in only the story you know how to tell, because you already know how to tell that story. So it's important to try and vary your writing. You know, try and draw from a lot of streams of inspiration so that you can see how different people tell stories and figure out ways to tell your story in a different voice, because not everybody's going to be interested in your story in the voice you want to tell them. So sometimes we look at people and we're like, I could tell it better than that, or that was okay. But there's something about how they're saying it that works for them. And you have to figure out what your voice is. And it's like that with, like I said, with any art. It's knowing your dance. There are people who dance out the entire time and sweating, and it's like, oh my God, they're so in it. But there are some people who are very graceful and there's no sweat. You know what I mean? So there are certain styles that work, and you have to figure out your style as an artist and what best fits and suits you so that you can do it to the best of your ability. And then once you have that, you figure out another way to do it. You know, in the States, I perform for audiences, and when I get to travel around the world, I've been lucky enough to travel around the world and perform for people who I never thought would care to hear the story I was going to tell. But giving that opportunity, I always make sure that I never half-ass. They say that here, right? Half-ass, like when someone doesn't give their full. In the United States, people are very comfortable with half-ass. People are comfortable with things being just given to them all the time. And so they don't strive or aspire to do much because it's always given to them. I live in a country where people are very much coddled like babies till they're adults and don't understand what it's like to be rejected or told no. And I think as a performer, especially dealing with art, you hear no a lot. Yeah. You get used to no. So it builds character. Also, I realize here there may not be a lot of stages to get up and perform. But I think any opportunity you can to perform, you do. Because it gets you more comfortable with what you're trying to say. So whether it's an open mic, whether it's a comedy club, or a bookstore, or a school cafeteria, wherever they allow you to get up on stage, I'm always a believer that you get up and tell your story, especially if they're going to give you the opportunity to do it. I met Kanye before he was Kanye West. So the way I met him was with Def Poetry, and he was auditioning for the show. And he had a CD, and he's like, I really like what you guys are doing, and here's a copy of my CD. You mind if I do a poem for you guys? And we sat there and we just watched him do a poem. And then he became Kanye West. You know what I mean? And that was also a lot of work because he was trying multiple things. He was doing his music, he was trying to rap, he did his poetry thing, and he kept on. And that's the thing. It's like you can't give up hearing the no's because the no's are going to come. But you have to keep going, keep moving forward. And then what happens is you start learning the twists and turns of life as an artist. So you kind of start getting in position and you start realizing certain things are going to come and you just learn to navigate around them and move until you get to the place you're trying to get to. I didn't want to get to a point, I didn't want to get older and go, I should have did that. I should have gave it a shot. I would rather have given it my best and it didn't work out the way I thought it would, but I at least gave it my best. Rather than, I wish I would have tried that. You know, because that happens too many times. We push to the side so many of our passions because we realize, you know, in the world we live in, which is very important, we have a job. There are things we have to do that sometimes, you know, what we really want to do gets pushed aside to do what we have to do. And there is a balance that can be found. It's your individual goal to find that purpose and how you can balance them. Because for me, living as an artist now, I have to find a balance between how much time I'm willing to spend away from home to support my family that stays at home. That's another thing you have to deal with. So aside from hearing yes, the no's and whatever, it's when you start having personal responsibilities, you have responsibilities other than yourself. When you have a family, you realize I can't leave for 2 months and just be on the road. And because for someone who doesn't understand that, it looks like I'm just having fun. I'm just going out on the road and I'm just enjoying everything I do. But a lot of what comes with that is there's a lot of loneliness that goes into that, which you have to, at a certain point, understand. And you create a relationship with that loneliness. Because my life, if I look at my life, and there are opportunities where I meet people, which is the best part about living and traveling, is I get to meet people and share stories. But my life is this. I get in a car by myself. I go to the airport. I'm on a plane. Person on the plane doesn't really talk. So I'm on the plane by myself. Headphones, whatever. I get to where I'm going. I go to my hotel. I'm in my hotel by myself. So the next day, I get up. I go to the venue. That entire time is very, you know, it's all compartmentalized, everything you're doing. And when it's over, I get back on the plane, get back in the car, go back to my house, and that's it. And so you get to a point where you have to decide whether or not that's worth it, that feeling. You know, the lonely feeling you get, because some people can distract themselves with just a crowd being enough to cure loneliness, where they're comfortable with the audience just, and they're like, yeah. But once that's over, can you still be okay with it? You know, there are a lot of performers, like if you look at like Michael Jackson, right? Before he died, I remember seeing him in interviews, and he was always saying how much more comfortable he felt on stage than off stage, because the loneliness was cured at that time. He didn't have to worry about just being by himself in his giant house and worry about what people want, because when he's there, he knows exactly what people want. They want to be entertained. They want to see his story be sung and danced on stage. As a poet and as a performer, is that good enough for you? Can you find both and find balance in it so that it works for you? You know, I remember initially getting into poetry, like first paid job. The first time I was paid to do poetry, there was a restaurant, and the restaurant said, we give you $15 and dinner. And I was like, oh shit! I called my best friend Poetry, and I was like, I'm getting paid $15 and I was so excited. And he was like, $15? Oh my God! Tell him I want to do it too. So, but at that time, $15 in dinner was great because someone was paying me to hear my story. And that's always how I looked at it. Like my story meant enough to somebody that they want to pay me to hear it. So I kept doing that, you know? And then my first, a college had paid me to come out, university. and it was $100. And I was excited about that because I'd never been given $100. And then I started working for bigger companies and things started coming up, and then the amounts became something I never thought someone would pay me. You know what I mean? Now, I had a endorsement deal with Adidas. I didn't have to leave my house for that deal. I stay home for a year, and just whenever they said they needed something, I could send it to them in an email. I didn't have to go anywhere. So I got to live my life regular without having to go anywhere and still do what I love doing. And then because of that time it allowed me, I got to go out to different poetry venues, still work on my craft, still be around other artists to find inspiration, because that's the thing too, is you sometimes get caught when you're doing only your art and you're hearing only your art, that your growth is kind of like stunted because you're not getting enough. And so it's really important to make sure you have time for that as an artist, that you have time to listen to other writers. I always think as a writer, you should read more than anything. But so I'm always reading. I always think it's important to keep reading as a writer. Yeah, and now I'm at a point now where I have people who call for work, which is great. You know, but that, like I said, it's been 15, 16 years. There's a lot of work that went into getting it to happen. But also the difference now compared to that time is there wasn't all the social media. The internet was still a very new thing. So it was completely building everything. Now, a lot of those things are in place where you can put your art out there for people to see. When I told people I was a poet, I was like, yeah, I do poetry. They're like, oh, you're a rapper? And I was like, no, I'm a poet. I do poetry. Like, oh, you rap. And I was like, no. Oh, none of my poems rhyme. I'm a poet. And they're like, oh, you're a rapper. And so once Def Poetry came out, I could go, this is what I do. And I could show people what I did. Now that's available to anybody. You have a camera, you can shoot something and you upload it onto YouTube. You have a channel of your videos, you know, and it's just putting it out there to a point where someone grabs onto it, because there's no formula for what works in art, because art's always changing. So, you know, what I think is great poetry isn't always the best-selling poetry. And that's another frustration you live with as an artist, because you feel like you're giving your best or there's something better, and that's not what's being rewarded. So in the States, one of the newspapers in the United States has a little comic strip, a little comic panel called Love Is, right? And it's one panel like this, and it's two big-headed people, one guy, one girl, and it's like, love is doing the dishes without being asked. And every day, it had a different one. And I used to cut them out. And I had a stack. And I was going to give it to the girl that I got with. And I got to a point where I was saying to myself, I would rather write my love rather than use someone else's love. So I wrote Love Like because of that. And also my favorite poet is the poet Rumi. And has a poem that just, the refrain was similar, and I really liked the way it was put together. And so that was how I patterned Love Like. As a poet, your writing and what you're willing to perform is important, because some of the writing you do, you may not be comfortable performing in front of certain people. So I have certain poems that I don't know, that I've written, that I don't know how comfortable I'd feel saying them in front of my mother or my father, because I wouldn't want them to feel hurt in any way. Because even if my mother was not there, I can't, you know, shun her off like that, because she's still my mother. So, yeah, but I've written about that. And I think it's a very important story for me, especially in the States, because so many people are raised by their mothers. And I was part of that generation that it was the mother, black mother raised the family. And I was lucky enough to have my father. And I say lucky enough because I think a lot of young black men aren't raised by their father, don't have a father or a male figure in their life, and there's no balance, you know. And I think balance is important. So I was lucky enough, and I always felt whenever I was given an opportunity, I would speak about being a father, being a husband, being vulnerable, because I think we're also, as men, brought up to believe you can't be vulnerable and you can't show vulnerability and you can't show emotion because that's what girls do. And you know, I think it's really interesting in like thinking about my friends and in the States is how we raise boys not to do that. You know, don't show emotion, don't show vulnerability. But we beat that out of them their entire lives, and they get older and they get in relationships and don't know how to connect emotionally, and then they're faulted for it. And so we don't realize that we have such a profound effect on how they deal with emotions. So it's a cycle that we are very much a part of and contribute to unknowingly for the most part, because it's something that has always been done. So we think there's nothing wrong with it or that kind of feeling. So I do talk about that. For a poetry show, I think initially what you do is you put together your own shows. And what you start doing is you start getting turnout. You know, you start out, you know, small. At first, you get 15 people. I know it's hard to get people to poetry reading. In the States, you put poetry on a flyer, people are like, I'm not going to that shit. Like, that's how they look at it. You know, that's exactly how they look at it. But what happens is you start out with 15 people, and you keep doing it consistently, and it builds to 30. Then you have 60 people. Then you have 100 something. Then you do shows where you have 200-300 people, and then you film that, and that's shown. You put together all that video footage and put it together in a package, and you show the diverseness of the audience, of the people who, the different economic backgrounds of everyone coming out, the cultures that are coming out, and you pitch that as something that's worth showing. Because what that shows is people want that, and people will flock to it if you give it to them, because people are looking for an alternative to what's being given to them already. Because most people are given, you know, we say in the States, I'm sorry for cursing, you say you give people candy-covered shit, they're going to eat the shit like it tastes fantastic. But at some point, they're going to go, oh, wait, I don't want this anymore. And so you have to give that alternative. You know, and I think that's what you provide. And you have to film it. And you have to put it together in a way that it looks good. It can't look like, you know, it's here on my camera like this, because that doesn't make someone see the value in it. There has to be production value to what you're putting together. So I always felt the same way with putting together like a book or my CD. I didn't just burn a CD and write my name on the disc. I waited and I saved and saved and saved and saved until I had the money to get a glass mastered CD that was properly mastered, put in like professionally done, and presented that. Because I wanted people to take what I do serious. And if I always give them some weak product, they're going to always expect weak product. And poetry is already looked at as something with weak product and weak production value. So it's important to show them, here's what it can do. Here's what you can do with poetry. And this is with no budget. Imagine with a budget what you can present. Deaf poetry, great example. Deaf poetry at its peak reached almost 2 million people in the United States a week, right? No one thought 2 million people would watch poetry. So it's possible. I can't remember if it's Iran or Saudi Arabia. There's a show called The Poet. The prize is $1 million. It's a show on television. And there are poets in these little, almost like a podium, like separate podiums, and they read poems every week. And they choose a winner. There's production value behind it. A lot of poetry, though, because people aren't ready to consume it in the way we're willing to package and process it and give it to them, is you have to put it with something else. So you have poets and music and comedy, and you put it together as a show, as a variety show. Even if your initial reason for doing it is to give a platform to poetry, if someone's not completely ready to accept that, you have to package it in a way that they'll be able to easily consume it. It's covering the poop, covering the crap with candy. It's the same thing. And over time, you're able to do that. Sometimes you wind up finding out that people know people that never ask because they're never asked to ask on behalf of you. You know, so some of it is that, is the networking of that. The other is going online, finding out who's in charge of advertising, who's in charge of marketing for that certain region, and you email, phone call. That's the best way to do it, because for me, one of the exact, like a parallel to that was, for me, the college market. College and university market is big in the United States. So I can tour the college and university market and do 60, 70 college shows a year. What I did initially was I went online, and there was a website called univsource.com, and it was all the colleges and universities in the United States. And it's just a map. And you have to click on each state, and all the colleges come up. I click one college, I go to their website, find out who's in charge of that, write it down. Click the next one. And I went through hundreds, not thousands of colleges. And I set up a tour. I winded up getting like 67 colleges to commit. And then I was trying to find out what local businesses would be interested in getting their name out there, as well as bigger or like mid-sized businesses that would be willing to put their name on the flyers and the posters. And so what I presented them with was a tour that was already in place. I had 67 shows around the United States already set. Are you willing to put some money towards it? And every blue moon, every once in a while, someone said yes. My first tour that was sponsored by somebody was sending email. And I was on a tour that was sponsored by Grand Marnier, which is like a liquor. And a website wanted to be one of the sponsors. And they sponsored me to go on the tour. And because it was enough money, I took Poetry with me. And that's how it happened. And then what happens is, once you have one, then it's easier to go to someone else because you have something, you know? So it's all lower level management and making sure that you have people in your team that are willing to do those things. They're coming with a package and going to, you know, whatever, Fanta or Altel or whatever the different companies here that are in. And the best thing here is communications. In the States, it's a lot easier to package football or basketball with a poet, because they're trying to gear towards like street, and they always look at poetry like a street art form, even though that's something I'm trying to get them to change as well, because I don't want to be promoted as the street poet. It sounds like they found me outside with a little hat going, here's my poem, can you put some, you know, and I don't want people to feel that way, because like I said, I want them to take what I do serious. So there are times where, because of where I've gotten in my life with my art, I say no to jobs that I know other poets would jump at in a moment's notice, just because I want them to see value in what I do. So when I talk to companies, I explain to them I have a union that works in my head. It's like the SHIHAN union. And the SHIHAN union will not let me work for less than whatever, $2,000 US for anything. Now, I do have the nice part of the union in human resources that says you can do some volunteer work 3 times a year. Or if it's one of your friends, you can do that. But you cannot take those often, because what I explain to colleges when they say, oh, we only have whatever, $700. Would you do it for $700? I go, well, you know, my flight's going to cost me this. My hotel's going to cost me this. My rental car is going to cost me this. My health insurance cost me this. My meals cost me this. I can't do it. So I break it down so that they understand what the costs that I incur are. And you have to do that. You have to give them, you have to break down your budget. So when you put together your show ideas and you pitch it, you have to put together a budget for every single thing. And it may not seem like some of the things you put in there are important, but they're very important. You know, it's the host. If you're the host, you're still a host, and there's a pay for being a producer of the event. Then you have your production team. Those people are paid a certain amount. Your sound manager, your house stage manager, house and lights person, that's budgeted. You have security, that's budgeted. You have the hostess or hosts, that's budgeted. And not just the host that's on stage, the host that welcomes people, the greeters who come in. All that stuff, you break everything down so that you have a formal budget to go along with your business plan of selling a poetry show. And when you have that, and you have it in a presentable, professional-looking package, it's a lot easier to take that serious than something like, it's written right here. You know what I mean? And it's very true. People will look at you like, and once you show them the work you put into it, then they also think you'll do work. So if they see your work ethic, they start to value the work ethic. And especially when you start getting turnout to events, then they believe, yeah, if they did that, then just imagine with this. You know, I run a poetry venue, and it's the largest weekly poetry venue in the United States. We get 270, 280 people a week. So it initially started in our house. It was in our living room, and we just invited friends over. And there were like 15, 20 people just like telling stories, reading poems, singing, playing guitar, whatever. All of a sudden, there were 75 people in our house. We didn't know most of the people in the house. So we're like, we need to get a space. So we found a venue. We started doing it there. We outgrew that venue. Then we moved to this theater we're in now. And I showed the picture yesterday. You're completely surrounded. Completely surrounded. Your space on stage is about this much because there are people sitting everywhere around you. And it's 360. Also gets you to work on your performance because you don't just pay attention here because you realize you're completely surrounded. So you have to move around, you know. And so when advertisers and people see that in a package and they see people from everywhere and all walks of life, they see people who are in their 60s and 70s and kids in, you know, kindergarten up. It looks like something, you know, so that's kind of what you have to do. And it's really researching, going online, finding out what people, and find the interns because they're trying to make an impression as well. So you try and hit lower level people because they're trying to make something happen. So you try and make those connections to make something kind of pop. Something needs to happen first. There needs to be something, and a lot of it is the sacrifice to make it happen. You know, there are events that, look, there was a group from New Zealand that they have a poetry scene that's coming up now and they want to reach people, but it's so small. What they did was they saved for a couple of years, and 7 of them came to the United States and came to a couple of different venues, and it started a relationship with them. So now there are poets from the States who go to New Zealand and back and forth. So it's possible, but initially you have to get it, and you have to find the artists who are willing to do it. Because there'll be people who will not care other than to get their paycheck and to go home, which is a reality too. Yeah. And something that you just, you know, if you're going to deal with art, you're going to realize that's going to happen. So that's something you wind up learning to deal with. But it can be disheartening when you're trying to build something and someone doesn't care to help in the building. They just want the check and to go home. So it is very possible, but it takes a lot of work on both sides, you know, and you have to find people on both sides who are willing to do the groundwork to make it happen. And you have to build the groundswell of like word of mouth. And so that's the way to start it because it garners interest. You know, the same thing with New Zealand. I went to New Zealand, same way. Poetry in New Zealand. I got in touch with the University of Massey there. And it just so happened that the guy who was in charge of booking performances at the campus said, we can only offer $700 total. Would you be willing to come? And even though the ticket was $1,300, I said yes, because I think it's important to have the seed planted so that they can see that it was worth doing. So next time they would fly me. And so that's what I did. And so now, you know, I go there twice a year. And now there are poets who go there consistently throughout the year because that was at least initiated and built so that there was a bridge that they can actually cross without having to build the bridge to get there. That had already been done. So it's the same thing here. This bridge is being built now. So what happens is people, the poets and friends start going, oh, okay. And they start seeing that, because they need to also see it. Because a lot of the value is in the person who's vouching for the value of it. So the person claiming the value here has to have credibility, and the person in the United States has to have credibility to vouch for it also. So people say, I'm not just a random guy saying, oh, it's good there. I'm actually someone who has meaning in the poetry scene and whose word has value, that they go, oh, okay, we should check that out. When I'm home, I try to dedicate my time to my family. My family time is my family time. So when my kids are at school and my wife's at work, I can do email all day. There are basically 3 management companies in the United States. It's a very picky, choosy who they want, why they want, because they also try and fill demographics. So they want the Spanish poet that talks about this, the white poet who does this, the black man poet who talks, it's that. So it is tricky because most of the management companies don't know what it's like to be a poet. So they have a lack of respect for it still. And the agents and managers who have the opportunities don't know what to do with a poet. So the ones who do know what to do with a poet don't really have the connections. And the ones who have all the connections are unsure what to do. So it's really, to answer your question, there is, but in reality, most of the poets self-book themselves. I ran a company for a while. It's very difficult because trying to round up poets is like trying to round up cats. They do whatever they want. And you're like, okay. And so it became very difficult. And when you're trying to have a business, you have to focus on what's working to establish it first before you can start just kind of picking and choosing. And so that's kind of where it was. YouTube last year spent $170 million to create, $100 million to create 160 channels on YouTube. Only one of those channels is still there. So they spent $100 million for one channel to work. So they learned through that whole process what the channel was, and now they're trying to figure out what they're going to do this time. So it was the same thing. I put the money out there to see which things got return on and which didn't. And so next time, I was like, okay, here's my money's focusing on this. You know, I bought a video camera. I spent the money so that it was a high definition. It looked good. It didn't look like a cell phone. It didn't look like a old video camera. It looked quality. High def, it was, I could show that to somebody and they go, oh, that looks good. Not, oh, that's okay. You know, I spent the money on that. And that was, you know, it was like $2,000 or something like that. But I wanted the videos that I was doing to look like they were done. I didn't want them to look like just some video I did, you know? And because of the way technology is now, you can get stuff done and it looks way better than the money that you actually put into it because there's so much you can do post-production wise. There's a lot of stuff you can do. So, yeah, it's kind of pocketing up some money and saving, figuring out how much you're willing to take the hit on. Because what you have to think, at the same time, it's great to think positive. You have to take care of the negative. You know, like a lot of people I know are like, don't think about the negative. You know, and I'm like, look, the positive takes care of itself. The negative needs to be paid attention to, or you wind up having a whole bunch of problems. So you think how much you're willing to take the hit on, and you put it into it, and you give it a go. And then you at least know from what you put in and what you got back, what is worth doing next time you do it. And if you can find someone who's willing to do it with you. You know what I'm saying? Because that's the thing too, is trying to create a collective of people who want to do what you want to do. And in different ways. So you might be a photographer. You might have somebody who's a videographer, someone who does really great post-production stuff, someone who can produce and put together an event really well, someone who's a graphic, like you put together your team so everything is covered so the cost isn't as much, you know? So that's it. My mother tells me I have a gift when it comes to this writing stuff, but I'm left-handed. So I guess I write words with the wrong hand, send the right message to the wrong people, and I swear I will talk myself to death if I don't find salvation soon, or at least 2 good ears that will hear my problems. And forgive me, Lord, but I came to the realization early in life that I did not need religion to make me feel any worse about myself. But don't get me wrong, I am thankful. I'm thankful for being blessed with a father whose conscience was comfortable with violence and a mother who decided to spread her wings and fly herself into the armed forces before her first and only child could turn 6. And I am lost, and I am searching for guidance. And I do pray. I pray my daughter be more confident in who she is and not what she has than I was. And I pray for a new heart with understanding because my heart does not wear a watch, has no concept of time, and my recovery time is based on understanding, but I still don't understand. And I pray, and I pray. I pray you fill those generation gaps with more understanding because I can see the slave in those young generations who'd rather be dissing pyramids while praising projects. And I tell them I would sacrifice the I in me to get the slave out of you, but they don't hear me. And I'm running out of time, but I live in a time obsessed with living another time, so no one ever knows what time it is. So now my shoulder blades are starting to poke out the backs of my t-shirts. Looks a lot like I'm growing wings. But really, I'm struggling to carry the weight of these words. And way too much, my words, way too much. So I hope I've said enough for you. And if I have, well then how much better would this poem be if I got mad right now? And how much more would this poem affect you if I got sad right now and started to cry? Or better yet, would you still cry if I borrowed your eyes? Or would you still dream if no one inspired you? I ask you these questions because I love you. And on my deathbed, you can catch me at a mic in dim lights with 1 No. 2 pencil writing my last verse. And my mother will say, boy, don't you know you go blind writing in the dark like that? And I say, Mom, you'd be glad to know that if I were to go blind writing, the last thing I saw before total darkness was truth. Thank you. Thank you. Oh. God. I started writing when I was in the second grade, because I love to read, and I started entering contests to win books. So that's how I got into it.
What particular experience?
Oh God, as a career, taking poetry as a career, oh my God. I don't know, I think I know more the moment when I decided to take it serious. And it was in, oh God, in 1994. My best friend at the time, OD, on drugs, and I held him when it happened. And that moment kind of changed everything. It made me put a lot of things in perspective and prioritize what was going on. So that was kind of the moment. Yeah. All right.
I wanted to ask, what were some of the challenges that you faced?
Some of the challenges I faced, hearing no and getting used to hearing no and being comfortable hearing no. Also, knowing I had to continuously prove myself to people, because even though I believe in myself, I had to prove to other people that it was worth them taking the time out to invest in what I had to say. And I guess the other sacrifice would be the time away from home. That's pretty much it, yes.
So, for most of the poetry, like what inspires you?
My biggest inspiration are my family and my friends. And I read a lot, so a lot of the stuff I read, and just seeing what's going on in the world is enough inspiration. So, yeah, whenever it comes, I take it.
Last and final question is, what is your advice to any upcoming poet in Nigeria?
Any upcoming poets in Nigeria, advice?
In Africa.
In Africa in general. My advice for any writer, anywhere in the world, is to read. You can't really grow as a writer if you don't read any material other than your own. But dedicate time every day to your craft so that you can do it. So, yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.